Okay, so you wanted to really dig into love and loss this time and maybe a bit about how people change and grow along the way.
Yeah.
Well, we found a book that really gets right into it. It's called I Don't Love You Anymore by Rithvik Singh.
Wow. Yeah, that title.
I know, right?
It's
It
intense.
really grabs your attention. It's by Rithvik Singh. Have you heard of him?
I think so. I've heard the name, but I haven't read the book.
Okay, yeah. So this book, it's really interesting.
I can imagine with a title like that.
It makes you wonder why he would start with such a strong statement, right?
Yeah, it's like he's trying to make a point. It's definitely not your typical love story.
No, not at all. It's not about happily ever after. It's about facing the sometimes painful realities of love head on. And that's what Singh does. He goes right for the raw emotional truths about relationships.
And the title kind of throws down a challenge right from the start.
Yeah, it does. It's like he's saying, okay, let's be real here. Love isn't always pretty. And one of the big things he tackles is this idea that love stays the same, that once you found it, you're done, you're set.
Oh, that's so common though, isn't it? Like we're almost conditioned to think that way.
Right. It's like once you found the one, you're supposed to live happily ever after.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this book so different. It's like he's shaking us awake and saying, hey, wake up. Love isn't static. It's fluid. It changes and evolves just like we do.
Which makes so much sense when you think about it. We change throughout our lives, so why wouldn't love change too?
Right. It's like we go through all these different phases in our lives, but we expect our relationships to stay exactly the same, and then we're surprised when they don't.
Exactly. And sometimes those changes mean love fades. And sometimes it happens slowly, so subtly that you don't even realize it's happening.
He has this line in the book that really struck me. Love doesn't always end with a bang. Sometimes it leaves quietly, without a word, just a feeling.
Wow, that's powerful. It's like
Yeah.
you wake up one day and realize something's different, but you can't quite put your finger on it.
Yeah, and that could be even more unsettling than a dramatic breakup because you're left with this feeling of what happened? When did things change? It can really make you question yourself.
It's like the relationship becomes this ghost of what it used to be. And you're haunted by memories, wondering if you were the one who chased the love away.
Right. And I think that's where Singh's perspective gets really interesting. He says that those quieter endings can be incredibly powerful opportunities for self-discovery.
Because without that clear reason for the breakup, you're forced to look inward.
Exactly. It's like, okay, if it wasn't this big dramatic thing, then what was it? What's changed? And maybe more importantly, who am I now that this love is gone?
Instead of just moving on to the next relationship, you have to actually sit with yourself and figure out who you are now.
It's almost like the relationship was a mirror. And now that it's gone, you can finally see yourself clearly, maybe for the first time in a long time.
Which can be both amazing and terrifying at the same time, right?
Totally. But Singh doesn't frame this post-love self-discovery as a bad thing. He actually sees it as an opportunity to reclaim parts of ourselves that we might have lost along the way. Those pieces of ourselves that we sacrificed or put on hold for the sake of the relationship.
So it's not about dwelling in the wreckage of the past, but rather using that experience as fuel for growth.
Exactly. And a big part of that growth, Singh argues, is finding the courage to let go, even when it feels impossible.
Which can be so difficult, especially when we're bombarded with messages about fighting for love, never giving up.
I know, right? It's like we're conditioned to believe that if we just tried harder, loved harder, then everything would work out.
But sometimes, as hard as it is to admit, letting go is actually the braver choice and ultimately the healthier choice for both people involved.
He has this other quote that I think sums it up perfectly. To leave doesn't mean you never loved. It means you're brave enough to accept that love has changed.
Wow, because it's true, isn't it? Just because love changes or even ends doesn't mean it wasn't real.
Exactly. And acknowledging that, having the courage to walk away from something that's no longer serving you, that's a powerful act of self-love.
It's about honoring your own needs and growth, even when it hurts, which, let's be honest, can feel impossible when you're in the thick of it. Especially if you're struggling with self-doubt, blaming yourself for the relationship ending.
Absolutely. And that's where Singh's emphasis on self-compassion becomes so crucial. Because it's so easy to fall into that trap of self-criticism after a breakup.
We beat ourselves up, wondering what we could have done differently, what's wrong with us.
Exactly. And Singh reminds us that it's okay to feel those things. Heartbreak, disappointment, even anger, those are all natural human emotions.
It's not about judging those feelings or trying to push them away. It's about sitting with them, acknowledging them, and then, most importantly, extending ourselves some grace.
Because we're all learning and growing. And sometimes that growth means letting go of relationships, even the ones we cherished.
It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress, and that's okay. And I think
Right.
that's a really powerful message, especially in a world that often tells us we need to have it all figured out.
Definitely. It's about giving ourselves permission to be perfectly imperfect and to approach love and relationships with an open heart and an open mind.
And that sounds like a perfect place for us to take a pause and reflect.
It does.
And when we come back, we'll explore how Singh takes this idea of self-compassion and applies it to the most important relationship we have, the one with ourselves. Okay, so we're back and we're really getting into some interesting stuff with this book, I Don't Love You Anymore. It's making me think about relationships in a whole new way.
It's definitely thought-provoking.
Before the break, we were talking about how breakups, even the ones that kind of sneak up on you, can be these huge catalysts for self-discovery. Like they force you to take a good, hard look at yourself.
Right, because it's easy to lose yourself in a relationship, to kind of forget who you are outside of that dynamic.
Totally. And Singh argues that understanding yourself is actually essential for any relationship, not just the romantic ones.
Yeah, he's really big on that point. He says self-awareness and self-love are like the foundation for everything.
So it's not enough to just go through a breakup and hope for the best in the next relationship.
He'd probably say that's a recipe for repeating the same patterns over and over again.
Ouch. Yeah, I can see that happening.
Yeah,
It's like if you don't do the work, you're just bringing your baggage from one relationship to the next.
exactly. And Singh gives this example in the book. He talks about this guy who kept attracting partners who were emotionally unavailable. Like they just couldn't really open up or commit.
Oh man, I know that pattern all too well.
Right. It's like a classic dynamic. And the guy in the book, he's blaming all these women for not being able to meet his needs.
But there's got to be more to it than that.
Right? That's what Singh uncovers. He points out that this pattern wasn't just bad luck with picking partners. It was actually a reflection of the guy's own fear of vulnerability.
Wow, so he was subconsciously choosing people who would reinforce that pattern.
Exactly. He hadn't dealt with his own emotional baggage, so he kept ending up with people who mirrored that back to him. It's like he was unconsciously sabotaging himself.
That's kind of a scary thought. Like, what if we're all doing that to some extent?
It's definitely something to consider. But the good news is that once we become aware of those patterns, we can start to change them.
So it's about becoming